attentive or hyperactive type, and DSM-5 will abandon them. They are contaminated with each other because there really is only a single ADHD in the human population, and it varies in its severity, and all these types have done is to capture the degree of severity of a single disorder. So we are now grappling for ways of subgrouping people with ADHD that is more clinically useful than the DSM view is, because the DSM view is useless. And one of those ways that is very compelling is ADHD with and without conduct disorder. The Europeans have done this for decades. In the North American continent, we viewed conduct disorder as a comorbidity. We are now looking at it as a subgrouping criteria. Because you see, ADHD children who have conduct disorder differ from ADHD children without it in many, many respects. So many, in fact, that we are now coming to think of this subset of children who have both disorders as a unique form of ADHD. Because both disorders are more severe. Both disorders start earlier. Both disorders are far more persistent. And the combination of these disorders will predict ongoing difficulties with antisocial behavior into adulthood. And just as important, these individuals carry a high risk for psychopathy. 1 in 5 of these children is a budding psychopath, a child who lacks guilt, conscience, empathy, and remorse, a child who is a predator. ADHD does not contribute to psychopathy, but ADHD with conduct disorder is the single best predictor of the psychopath that we know of. So in the future, we may be making the same distinction the Europeans have, that when conduct disorder and ADHD go together, we have an extraordinarily virulent disorder. In case you're not familiar with conduct disorder, it is the early appearance of lying, stealing, fighting, and preying on other children in an instrumental way. It is violating the rights of other people for your own gain. And it manifests early as the lying, the stealing, and the fighting, but other symptoms will develop thereafter. The hyperactive type of ADHD never existed because 90% of all cases go on to get the combined type within 3 years. And even if they don't get the combined type, they're just one symptom short. And so we call them subthreshold combined types, but they're not a different type. So if we take these two groups of children, who really are just variations on the good old combined type of ADHD, that's 95% of all the kids put into this group. There is a small group left over who are purely oppositional. But because they have pure oppositional disorder and they never had ADHD, they will outgrow their ODD, usually within 2 to 4 years, and their ADHD will go away. Why are they there? Because parents confuse ODD with ADHD. And if their child is only oppositional, they often report that they have symptoms of ADHD when they don't. But ODD alone is a relatively benign disorder, unless it goes with ADHD, and that it is a highly persistent disorder. Now, the real action during the past decade has been with this inattentive group of children, most of whom are combined type children. And they grew up, and they lost some hyperactivity along the way, as we said. And as a result, there's going to come a time in adolescence, and especially by adulthood, where they're just not hyperactive enough to stay in the combined type anymore. And so clinicians relabel them as inattentive type, but they shouldn't. Once combined type, always combined type. But you can see how at least half of the individuals get put into the inattentive group. They're just outgrowing their hyperactivity. And then there's that group of children who just are 1 or 2 symptoms short of being in the combined type, but they have the combined type anyway. They're just a milder version of it. But interestingly, 30 to 50% of the children who are now called inattentive type probably have a different disorder. And researchers have called them SCT. It's about 30 to 50% of all inattentive type children, and we now believe this is a qualitatively unique disorder. The debate now is whether this is a separate type of ADHD, a point with which I disagree, or is it a qualitatively separate disorder, a point with which I agree. Why would I view this as a different disorder? First of all, the symptoms are the opposite of ADHD. But you won't see them anywhere in the DSM. But these are the most compelling symptoms that go with SCT. But because these children also have an attention problem, there is no place else to put them, because ADHD is the only attention disorder in the DSM. So they get dropped into ADHD, even though they have no symptoms in common with it. These individuals have a problem with processing information, which ADHD children do not have. These children have trouble with focused attention, choosing what's important